Tech Nuggets, VMware ESXi. ESXi is a hypervisor made by the VMware Corporation, which is owned by Dell. It's a product that we use in data centers to create virtual machines, work with virtual machines. It's often what we use on what we consider bare metal, which is an actual physical computer to run the host. But we can deploy it in a different way. We can deploy it actually inside another hypervisor. And in the example I'm going to do here in a minute, it's going to be VMware Workstation, which is the desktop version, which would run in like Windows or Linux. And we'll deploy ESXi inside that to use it as a home lab. So that we can play with ESXi and learn about ESXi. In the normal data center world, we would deploy that onto bare metal and use it that way. But I'll be using it in a demo way so we can work with it as a home lab. All right, let's go on to the practical demonstration. This is VMware Workstation 5.5 Pro, running on Windows. I've done a previous video about VMware intros and workstations, so we're sort of assuming you've seen that one. If you haven't, totally go back and watch it again. Got our virtual network editor. I'm going to quickly go over. We're going to be using this NAT segment so that we've got, everything kind of slammed inside a known environment that we can play with. In my instance, it's going to be the 220.0/24 network. You can see the subnet mask down here shows all that off. And let's charge into it. So I downloaded VMware's ESXi 7, which is the new one that's just come out like 2-3 weeks ago. And we're going to build an ESXi inside here. So it's actually not too bad. We go in, we say create a custom machine. We're going to select the ISO, which is going to live on my machine. It lives here. VMware, and that's the ISO for it, and we're going to select that, and it's going to look at it and try to detect what it is. If it knows what it is, it'll ask you a bunch of questions right there, otherwise, and try to pre-populate some of those things, and otherwise it's just going to go on and say, well, I don't know what it is, let you pick. And in this case, Workstation has not been updated to understand what VMware ESXi 7 is, so it can't answer any of those questions, which is why it doesn't show up on this list. We're going to pick 6. It's going to work fine. Honestly, it's a flavor of Linux, so it's just presetting a bunch of that. So we'll say ESXi, and I've got my usual home. ESXi 1. My usual home is on my D drive for all my VMs. So it's going to have us create a disk here, and this is the boot disk that ESXi is going to use. And it doesn't need to be very big because ESXi is not very big. So we're going to go to 10 gig boot disk. Once we get all done, we'll go back and add a data disk, which is the storage that we'll need for our guests inside this. We're going to customize our hardware. Remember, this is an ESXi host, so we're going to need to add a little bit more RAM for it. And instead of 2 processors with 1 core, I'm going to add 1 processor with 3 cores. And give it a little more virtual CPUs to work with. It's really key that this checkbox happens so that we can use the recursive hypervisors to virtualize those kinds of things. I often check all 3. Your hardware will need to support this, and newer hardware all supports it, so that won't be a big deal. We're going to hit close here, and we'll hit finish, and it'll create the VM. Now we're going to need to go back and add the data disk that we're going to use to put our VMs on. So for some reason, this option did not exist. If we had gone under customized hardware, the hard disk option doesn't exist. I really don't know why. We're going to go in and take the recommended. We're going to create a new virtual disk. We're going to give it, 40, 50 gigs. This is fine. We're going to store it as a single file. I'm not going to allocate the disks now. This is going to thin provision it, which means it'll only actually use the disk space as we use the disk space, as opposed to allocating it all now and filling up the hard drive. Thin provisioning is very common. The standard names here are fine. So it will add a second disk to it, so you can see we have 2 hard disks here, and that's what we'll need when we charge forward and start this thing. So we'll do a little time compression here as it starts. It'll be kind of slow as it goes along. All right, so it's going to stop and want me to hit enter and reboot, which we'll do. And we'll hit F11 to continue. This is the user license agreement. And it will scan for a couple seconds here. We'll do a little time compression. And it'll come up and ask us where we want to install our ESX. All right, these are the two different partitions we made. So we're going to pick the 10 gig one. Whatever's yellow is going to be what's there. So yellow, we're going to pick the 10 gig one. And it's going to ask us some basic questions. What kind of keyboard do we use? What's our password? That kind of stuff. And it'll scan for a little while, and we'll want to confirm all our choices. We'll hit F11. We'll do a little more time compression here to make this faster. All right, we hit enter to reboot. The system will reboot. At some point, we'll need to go take the ISO image out so that it'll try not to boot off it, but it shouldn't be booting off it at this point. There we go, and it's not. All right, so you can see we've come up, we're doing DHCP now, and we're sitting in a console. The console is really boring. There's not a lot going on, and if we click on it, we can, you can see in the lower corners, we get F2 to customize and F12 to shut it down. We're gonna do an F2, it'll want us to log in, and really the only things we can do here are configure the management interface, which we want to do. We don't want to do DHCP, generally speaking, because we don't want it to change. So we're going to, go down to IPv4 configuration, and we're going to select the set static. And what we're going to do, if you'll remember when we looked at our settings for DHCP, it said the DHCP range was between 128 and 254. So we want to pick something in the top half of the range that would be set aside for statics. And this is a good time to go, update your, documentation. I'm going to pick 50 for our first one. That's going to leave me some space before that for other things. And we'll need to change that. We'll also need to change our DNS configuration to use the following. We're not going to make any changes because 220.2 is my DNS server for this network. And when we hit escape and get out, it's going to want to apply those changes. We're going to say yes. I'm just going to go through and apply those changes. And we'll hit escape again, and it'll drop us back to the console. You can see now it says 220.50 is our static. Since our host machine has a virtual Ethernet on the 220.0 network, we'll be able to open up a local browser and go to 220.50, and it'll open that up for us, and we'll be able to get in and work with the web interface of ESXi, which is where most of the exciting magic happens. If you leave the interface alone here long enough, it'll eventually go to a dark color, which is its kind of sleep state for its local console, and that's normal. So I've got my local browser. This is running on my Windows desktop, the same machine that runs VMware Workstation. And we've got a virtual NIC on the desktop when we installed VMware Workstation that allows my local desktop to be in the same network with all the other NATed boxes. So we'll be able to put in the static IP address that I used for and just configured in the console. And we should be able to get directly there. This is normal. We've been redirected to HTTPS, which is using a self-signed cert. And the browser is complaining and saying, I can't resolve this cert chain. I don't know what to do. And normally, this is normal. In a production environment, you'd go in, you put the right certs in, and you would not get this error. At home, it's a home lab. We're going to accept the risk and continue, which will accept the cert, and it won't ask us about this again. With Chrome, we'll have something similar. There'll be language that goes with this, and we can accept the risk and continue, which will leave us at our login here. And we can log in and see that, all the different things. No, LastPass, we don't need you. And we'll be able to see the basics of our, ESXi server. We can see the hardware, we can see the RAM it's got, we can see it's installed. We don't see any data stores, which is normal the first time out the gate. We're going to go to storage and create it. So we'll want to say new data store, and we're going to create a VMFS data store, VMware file system data store. We're going to select that local 40 gig partition. We're just going to call it data store 1. And it's going to ask us questions about what do we do with the whole thing. I'm just going to select the basics. We're going to use the full disk. We want to use it all up. And it wants to make sure, am I really sure? Yes, I'm sure. So we've now gone through and created the data store, and click on it and look at it. It'll tell me a little about it, what versions and how big it is and where it exists and how much is used up here and that kind of stuff. If we go back to our host summary, we can scroll down to the bottom and we now see there's a data store. We have everything we need at this point to create locally running VMs on ESXi. The biggest problem is we don't have any install media, which we might need to upload into our data store. So if we were to do that, we can go to Data Store Browser and we can upload ISOs right here. And we'll need to figure out how to shove them in there. And we can do things like create a folder. I call mine ISOs because I'm going to put ISOs in them. And we go into the folder and we say upload. And we might go to OS and Ubuntu. And we're gonna put a just a server version of Ubuntu's ISO up there, and it'll sit and chug away. And you can see down here, it's uploading our ISO. We can see it's going along, and we'll zip through that real quick. All right, so at this point, we're going to need to go in and look at our virtual machine. This is kind of standard what a virtual machine is going to look like. It's going to show all the different options that we've already set up and set on it. If we want to go change them, we go up here to edit, and this is where we're going to go down to our CD, DVD, ROM drive. And we're going to select Data Store, and we're going to go to ISO, and we're going to select the ISO that we created. Most importantly, we're also going to hit connect, or it won't connect it when we go to boot it, and therefore it won't boot off the ISO. So we're going to hit save, and we're going to power that on. And when we want to see the console, we say, well, where's it go? It's just giving me this little thumbnail. If you click on the thumbnail, it'll give you a web client that you can see what's going on. You'll be able to interact with it. It'll seize your mouse, just like the other one does when we use the workstation. And we'll see it boot, and we'll go through the install. And I'll do a little time compression on this to show what's going on. At this point, I'm going to need to remove the CD from the virtual disk. So we're going to go back over here to edit, and we're going to take it out. So we'll send it back to host device, and the connect button we can uncheck. We'll save it, and it'll pull it out. At that point, we can go and hit enter, and it'll reboot the box. It should leave us at a working VM. All right, so I'm sitting here at a login prompt. It's going to go through a couple other little events here. So while this looks like a tumble mess, it's really, I just clicked on it, hit enter a couple times. It's sort of the post that goes on. So we have a working VM at this point. It's, recursed inside, our ESXi. We can see some interesting things about it, right? We've got CPU time that's happened here. Up the top, it'll tell us how much memory is in use and that kind of thing and what it's doing. And we go up to host and look, and we'll be able to see that, again, it's using some resources here and things like that. Had we multiple VMs, we would be able to see them, in here and open them up. And more VMs, we can go add them, or we can click on them and see kind of what's going on. All right, well, I hope you've enjoyed this Tech Nugget. On our next Tech Nugget, we will go into how to install VMware in our home lab and get it configured to see our ESXi and pull it all in, and we'll be able to manage and work with it in that. So, until next time.